Talking Jo-won Beck recalled that, when he was a gross-ah child, he had been taught by a teacher named Eun-young Seo. She had always taken the time to explain every concept to him until he understood it completely. As the years passed, he had become deeply attached to her, and often found himself simping for his teacher. Many years later, after growing up, he realized that those emotions had only been youthful daydreams. Waking from yet another dream about her, he wondered why he kept dreaming about things that had never actually happened. While he was lost in those thoughts, his phone suddenly rang. After introducing himself to the caller, he confirmed that he was available the following day. Meanwhile, a young woman named Heron was walking around her room wearing a bathrobe. Looking at the untidy room around her, she thought that she really should clean it up. Just then, the doorbell rang, making her wonder who could be visiting at that hour. She walked over and opened the door, only to find Jo-won standing outside. Introducing himself politely, he mentioned that he had heard she was looking for a private tutor. Embarrassed by her appearance, Heron quickly apologized, explaining that she usually dressed comfortably whenever she was at home. She then invited him inside. After changing into proper clothes, the two of them sat together with cups of tea and began talking. During their conversation, Heron explained that she was planning to study abroad, but her English skills were very weak. Jo-won assumed that she must already be attending college and asked which university she was planning to enroll in. Heron casually replied that it was just an ordinary, little-known school. She then commented that he must have graduated from a prestigious university before asking whether he had majored in English literature. Jo-won confirmed that he had. However, Heron remarked that having a degree and being able to teach effectively were two completely different things. Jo-won calmly agreed, although inwardly he thought that she looked much younger than him despite having quite a terrible attitude. Hoping to reassure her, he explained that he himself had once studied under an excellent private tutor. Thanks to her guidance, he had managed to enter a good university, and over time he had naturally learned many of her teaching methods as well. At that moment, Harin's mother entered the room. Smiling as she noticed Jo-won, she remarked that he had already arrived and kindly asked him to take good care of Heron. Heron immediately became annoyed by her mother's comment, pointing out that they had not even decided whether he would become her tutor yet. Curious, her mother then asked for his name. As soon as Jo-won introduced himself, she froze in surprise, instantly recognizing him. Harin looked back and forth between the two of them in confusion, before asking whether her mother actually knew him. At the same moment, Jo-won also recognized her. She was none other than his beloved former tutor, Eun-young Seo. Eun-young smiled warmly and admitted that she could hardly believe they were meeting again under such unexpected circumstances. She mentioned that she had heard his business had not been doing well, which was why he had taken on private tutoring as a part-time job. Jo-won honestly admitted that it was true. Eun-young then comforted him by explaining that she herself had also worked as a private tutor years ago when her husband's business had been struggling financially. Hearing that reminded Jo-won of the past, and he confessed that he truly missed those days. Watching the conversation unfold, Heron interrupted them by reminding both of them that they were actually there to find her a new tutor. She suggested that they could catch up another time because anyone watching them might mistakenly assume that two former lovers had reunited. Hearing her remark, Jo-won quietly looked at Eun-young and thought that she had hardly changed at all. In fact, she looked even more attractive than many younger women. Since he had already dreamed about her that very morning, seeing her again only made his heart race even faster. Eun-young noticed his unusual excitement and silently wondered why he seemed so flustered. Soon afterward, Heron opened the door and suggested to her mother that they should hold the trial lesson at a nearby cafe instead. Jo-won agreed with the idea, and he left the house together with Harin for the trial class. After they had departed, Eun-young remained at home washing the dishes. While quietly finishing the household chores, she found herself thinking that she still could not believe they had met again after all those years. She wondered whether Jo-won would be able to teach Heron well. Remembering how intelligent he had always been as a child, she sincerely hoped that her daughter would like him, because she personally felt very comfortable entrusting Heron's education to him. While she was still occupied with those thoughts, the front door opened and her husband returned home. Surprised to see him at that hour, Eun-young remarked that it was unusual for him to be home so early. He explained that he had suddenly been assigned to a last-minute business trip and would not be returning home for the next few days. Before leaving, he suggested that they should spend some time exercising together, and Eun-young happily agreed to join him for the flexibility training. After completing Jo-won's initial trial lesson, Heron admitted that she wanted him to become her private tutor. She told him that he taught much better than she had expected, and suggested that he should also share the good news with her mother. She then mentioned that she had plans to meet one of her friends nearby, which was why she would be leaving. Jo-won agreed without any objection, although he quietly realized that this was probably the reason she had wanted to hold the trial lesson at the cafe in the first place. After leaving the cafe, Jo-won began walking toward Eun-young's home. Along the way, he thought that she might be happy if he personally told her that he had been chosen as Harin's tutor. Since he assumed that she was probably alone at home, he decided to stop by and share the news with her himself. As he approached the apartment, he noticed that the front door had been left slightly open. Curious, he carefully peeked inside. The moment he looked into the apartment, he was completely taken by surprise. Standing inside, he saw Eun-young spending time with her husband, as the two of them were in the middle of a core training session together. After completing her stretching session, Eun-young informed her husband that she had finally found a new tutor for Haran. After hearing the news, he calmly replied that it sounded fine. At the same time, Jo-won was standing quietly outside the apartment, unintentionally overhearing their conversation through the slightly open door. As he realized that he had remained there for far too long, he became anxious and thought that he needed to leave immediately before anyone noticed his presence or caught him standing outside. Just as Eun-young was about to close the front door, her husband suddenly noticed that something was strange. He mentioned that he clearly remembered closing the door himself when he had entered the apartment earlier, yet it was somehow standing open again. Assuming that there must be something wrong with the door lock, he asked Eun-young to call someone to repair it as soon as possible. Eun-young simply agreed with his suggestion. Shortly afterward, her husband gathered his belongings and left the apartment to head off on his business trip. After seeing her husband leave, Eun-young was about to return inside when she noticed a wallet lying on the ground just outside the apartment. She bent down to pick it up and carefully looked at it for a moment, wondering who it could possibly belong to and how it had ended up there. Meanwhile, Jo-won was walking down the street while thinking to himself that he had rushed straight toward the bus stop without even realizing how quickly he had left the apartment building. He reminded himself that he should catch the next bus before it arrived. However, as he casually reached into his pocket to check his belongings, his expression immediately changed. He searched through his pockets once again, only to realize that his wallet was nowhere to be found. The sudden discovery left him completely shocked, and he instantly understood that he must have dropped it somewhere along the way. Before he could even think about where he had lost it, his phone suddenly began to ring. As soon as he answered the call, he heard Eun-young's voice on the other end. She informed him that she had found a wallet and that it contained what looked like one of his old intern business cards. The moment he heard those words, he immediately realized that he had accidentally dropped his wallet outside her apartment. Without wasting another second, he quickly told her that he would come over right away since he was already nearby. As he hurried back toward the apartment, he could not help but worry to himself, hoping that Eun-young had not realized that he had secretly been watching her and her husband from outside. Meanwhile, Eun-young quietly smiled to herself while holding the wallet. She found herself thinking that Jo-won was still just as clumsy as he had always been, and that some of his old habits had clearly never changed. As she continued holding the wallet, her curiosity slowly grew. She wondered whether there might be anything else inside besides his business card. Unable to resist her curiosity, she carefully opened the wallet. The moment she looked inside, she was surprised to find a small photograph of a young girl. She stared at it for a brief moment, wondering who the girl could possibly be and what kind of relationship she had with Jo-won. Curious to know more, Eun-young slowly reached for the photograph, intending to take a closer look at it. However, before she even had the chance to examine the picture properly, the sound of the door interrupted her as Jo-won had already arrived at her home. Jo-won gratefully accepted his wallet after Eun-young handed it back to him. Since he was already there, Eun-young suggested that they should have another cup of tea together before he left. Jo-won politely agreed to her suggestion, and Eun-young went into the kitchen to prepare the tea. A short while later, she returned carrying the tea and some snacks. As she approached the table, her eyes suddenly fell upon one of her gym clothings that had accidentally been left on the floor near where Jo-won was sitting. The unexpected sight instantly filled her with embarrassment, and she desperately hoped that he had not noticed it. Feeling flustered and unable to think clearly because of her embarrassment, she accidentally lost her balance while walking toward him. As a result, she stumbled forward, causing the tea to spill all over Jo-won. Realizing that the hot tea had spilled all over Jo-won, Eun-young immediately rushed toward him and quickly removed his soaked gym outfit, explaining that if she did not take it off right away, he could end up getting burned. Feeling extremely guilty about the accident, she repeatedly apologized, saying that she had only wanted to treat him to a cup of tea and had never expected something like this to happen. Jo-won prepared to leave, but Eun-young became upset when she saw that his clothes were still stained with tea. She insisted that she would wash them for him if he could just give her a little time. After saying that, she went into the bathroom and returned with an extra pair of pants. Handing them to Jo-won, she explained that they belonged to her husband and were simply his gym pants. She told Jo-won to wear them home since her husband would be away on a business trip for the next few days. After leaving Eun-young's house, Jo-won was still unable to process everything that had happened. He found himself wondering how such an ordinary visit had turned into such an awkward situation. As he continued walking down the street, he unexpectedly bumped into Haran. She was surprised to see him and wondered why he had not gone home yet. At that moment, Haran's friend, Aj, noticed Jo-won and teasingly pointed out that Haran seemed to have been staring at him. Haran immediately denied it, insisting that it was not true. However, her friend reminded her that she had previously been interested in Sung-chan and mentioned that he was already popular with many girls at school, adding that Haran had been one of the girls who liked him as well. Haran admitted that she had only been a little interested in him. Hearing that, her friend warned her that Sung-chan did not have a very good reputation when it came to girls, and advised her to be careful around him. Later that night, Eun-young found herself becoming increasingly worried because Haran had still not returned home. She thought that Haran wandered around every day, but it was getting much later than usual. As she sat alone, her thoughts unexpectedly drifted back to Jo-won. She reflected on how different he seemed now compared to the last time she had met him. She remembered that he had once been her student, yet he had now grown into a completely mature young man. Realizing where her thoughts were going, she immediately tried to stop herself. She told herself that she should drink a glass of cold water and clear her mind because there was no point in dwelling on such thoughts. She blamed the confusion on her husband, thinking that he had suddenly pushed her into a daily private PT session without any warning, and then left on a business trip immediately afterward. Meanwhile, Jo-won was at a hotel with his colleague Ye-won. The two of them were sitting together while having drinks. Ye-won jokingly remarked that she knew he had probably invited her there because of their gym session. However, Jo-won denied it and sincerely told her that he genuinely valued her because of all the hard work she had done. Smiling at his response, Ye-won playfully asked whether that meant she was the perfect partner for him. She then suggested that they should start doing their private PT sessions on a regular basis. After considering her suggestion, Jo-won agreed to it. The next morning, Jo-won received a phone call, and on the other end was Haran, who reminded him that he had completely forgotten about his student. She complained that he had not contacted her at all, before telling him that she wanted him to start coming to her house from that very day because she was officially asking him to become her tutor. Hearing her words, Jo-won simply agreed. After ending the call, he got himself ready and left for her house. As he made his way there, he quietly reflected that at least he would not have to worry about his living expenses for a while now that he had secured a tutoring job. After arriving at Haran's house, Jo-won was greeted with a warm welcome from both Haran and Eun-young. Haran happily welcomed him inside, as if she had been waiting for his arrival, while Eun-young also greeted him with a smile. However, Haran soon found herself feeling puzzled. The previous day, Jo-won and Eun-young had seemed genuinely happy to see each other, yet today they were acting strangely awkward around one another. Their expressions and behavior felt unusually stiff, making Haran wonder why the atmosphere between them had suddenly become so uncomfortable. While looking at Eun-young, Jo-won quietly reminded her that he wanted his pants back. The moment those words left his mouth, Eun-young became visibly flustered. She immediately signaled for him to lower his voice before quickly grabbing his hand. Without giving him a chance to say anything else, she turned toward Haran and calmly told her that they needed to talk for just a moment. She asked Haran to go ahead and prepare herself for the tutoring session while they finished their brief conversation. After leading Jo-won into another room, Eun-young quickly explained that he should never mention something like that so openly, because anyone who overheard them could easily misunderstand the situation. She assured him that she had not forgotten about his clothes and promised that she would secretly hand them back after the tutoring session was over. She told him to collect them quietly before leaving so that nobody would get the wrong impression. While waiting in the room, Jo-won casually looked around and noticed a framed wedding photograph displayed nearby. He quietly stared at the picture for a few moments before thinking to himself that Eun-young really seemed to share a close relationship with her husband. After seeing the two of them together the previous day and now looking at their wedding photograph, he could tell that they appeared to be a happily married couple. A short while later, Jo-won and Harin left the house together and headed toward the cafe for their tutoring session. As they walked, Harin questioned why they had come all the way back to the cafe again. She commented that she could not understand the reason because they could have simply studied at home instead. Jo-won listened to her without revealing the truth, while silently thinking that the real reason was because he needed to stop by Eun-young's house secretly later, making the cafe a much more convenient place for their lesson. As the tutoring session continued, Haran gradually became bored. She secretly observed Jo-won while thinking that she could tell just by looking at him that he was not an entertaining person at all. She found herself wishing that Sung-chan had been sitting across from her instead. At the same time, she remembered what one of her friends had told her about Sung-chan's reputation with girls. Although his reputation apparently was not very good, she still could not stop thinking about him. Still staring at Jo-won, Haran suddenly asked whether it was really that difficult for men to control their desires during mobility training. Jo-won was caught off guard by such an unexpected question. He immediately reminded her that they were in the middle of a tutoring session and that she should not be asking him questions like that while they were supposed to be studying. Harin simply listened to his response, but her thoughts had already wandered elsewhere as she found herself wondering what Sung-chan might be doing at that exact moment. Meanwhile, Jo-won had absolutely no idea who Sung-chan even was, nor did he realize that Harin had been thinking about someone else the entire time. Meanwhile, Sung-chan was spending time with Haran's friend, Seong-yi, as the two of them were having a relaxing stretch routine. During their conversation, Sung-chan casually mentioned that he wanted to become friends with the other girl whom Seong-yi had been spending time with recently. The moment she realized that he was talking about Harin, Sung Yi immediately became frustrated. She firmly warned him not to even talk about Harin because she was an innocent girl, making it clear that she did not want him getting involved with her. On the other side, Harin eventually finished her tutoring session with Jo Won. After the lesson came to an end, she mentioned that she already had plans for the rest of the day. Before leaving, she commented that although the tutoring session had not been particularly fun, she had still understood and absorbed everything very well. She then told Jo Won that she would see him next time before leaving the cafe. Once Harin had gone, Jo Won quietly thought to himself that this was the perfect opportunity to visit Yoon. Without wasting any more time, he headed straight toward her house. After arriving outside, he knocked on the door, and a few moments later, Yoon opened it. The instant she appeared before him, Jo Won was surprised to see that she was sweating. Noticing the surprised expression on his face, Yoon quickly explained that she had rushed out of the shower as soon as she heard someone at the door. She then looked at him with a confused expression and asked whether he was not supposed to be in the middle of Harin's tutoring session. Jo Won explained that they had managed to get through the study material much faster than he had expected because Harin understood new concepts very quickly and learned things without much difficulty. After hearing his explanation, Yoon accepted his answer and invited him inside, telling him that she would finally return his clothes. As she turned around to walk further into the house, her wet feet suddenly slipped on the water that had been left on the floor after her shower. Before she could completely lose her balance and fall, Jo Won quickly reached out and caught her, supporting her body just in time and helping her regain her balance. The next moment, Jo Won and Eun ended up on the floor after catching each other during the fall. Jo Won immediately looked at her with concern and asked whether she was all right. Eun assured him that she was completely fine. Feeling embarrassed about the situation, Jo Won quickly apologized for falling on top of her. Eun calmly explained that she had rushed out of the shower the moment she heard the doorbell, which was why she had been in such a hurry and accidentally slipped. She then told him that she would go and change into something more appropriate before coming back. With her face slightly flushed from embarrassment, she hurried into her room. Meanwhile, Jo Won remained seated on the couch in the living room, patiently waiting for her to return. A few moments later, Eun came back, carrying his wallet in her hands. Although she had just gone through such an awkward incident, she acted as though nothing unusual had happened. She calmly handed the wallet back to him and told him to take good care of it because it looked as though there was something very precious inside. She casually mentioned that she had noticed what appeared to be a photograph tucked inside the wallet. Hearing that, Jo Won immediately asked whether she had looked at the photograph. Eun quickly clarified that she had not taken it out or looked at it closely. She had only noticed that there seemed to be a picture inside the wallet. Curious, she then asked whether the person in the photograph was his girlfriend. Jo Won immediately denied it, explaining that he did not have a girlfriend. Eun smiled slightly before teasing him that perhaps it was someone he secretly had a crush on. Before Jo Won could respond or explain himself any further, he awkwardly interrupted the conversation by saying that he should get going. Without answering her question, he quickly left the house. After leaving, Jo Won felt extremely embarrassed about everything that had happened. As he walked toward the bus stop, he could not stop replaying the incident in his mind. He quietly thought that if Eun had noticed how flustered he had become, it would have been unbelievably embarrassing. While standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus, he slowly took out the photograph from inside his wallet. Looking at the picture, he reflected that although Eun had changed a great deal since they were younger, she still possessed the same breathtaking beauty that had always remained with her. Completely absorbed in his memories, he continued staring at the photograph without paying attention to his surroundings. Lost in those thoughts, Jo Won accidentally reached out and touched another woman nearby. The woman immediately turned around, and without giving him any opportunity to explain himself, she slapped him across the face because she believed that he had deliberately harassed her. Shocked by what had just happened, Jo Won repeatedly apologized and insisted that it had been an accident. However, the woman loudly demanded that someone call the police. The people nearby quickly surrounded Jo Won, assuming he had done something wrong, and restrained him before taking him to the police station. Throughout the entire ordeal, Jo Won continuously insisted that he was completely innocent and that he had never intended to touch her on purpose. Once they arrived at the police station, the officer began questioning both of them. He first asked for the woman's name, but instead of answering the intended question, she immediately introduced herself as Heeman Baek. The officer clarified that he had actually been asking for Jo Won's name rather than hers before continuing the questioning. After listening to Heeman's accusations, the police officer explained that there was not enough evidence to immediately accept her claims and that they would first have to investigate the situation properly. The officers then began questioning Jo Won in detail. After asking for his personal information, one of the officers inquired about his occupation. Jo Won honestly admitted that he was currently unemployed. The officer continued asking him all the necessary questions regarding his background before pointing out that he did not have a stable social status. He then asked whether Jo Won had anyone who could verify his identity or testify about his character. Jo Won sighed before explaining that he lived alone and had not kept in regular contact with any of his friends since graduating from college. He once again insisted that everything had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. After thinking for a moment, he admitted that if the police truly required someone to vouch for him, there was only one person he could possibly contact because she was someone he saw quite often. Having no other choice, he called his landlady and politely asked whether she could come to the police station. A short while later, his landlady arrived at the station. As soon as she saw Juan, she jokingly remarked that she could not believe the two of them were meeting in a place like the police station. The officer then asked about her relationship with Juan. She explained that she was his landlady and that she lived next door to him. Hearing that, the officer admitted that when Juan had said his landlady was coming, he had imagined an older man instead. Smiling, she explained that she was indeed the landlady because her husband had been much older than her and had passed away, leaving the property under her care. She then looked at the officer and asked whether she had really been called all the way there just to hear an accusation that Juan had harassed another woman. She firmly stated that as his landlady, she frequently crossed paths with him because they lived right next to each other. Based on everything she had observed over time, Juan was a reliable and honest young man who had never behaved suspiciously or shown any signs of being the type of person who would harass women. After hearing her testimony, the police officer turned toward Heman and explained that they currently had no evidence other than her personal statement. He then asked whether she had anyone who could support her version of events or testify as a witness. Heman reluctantly admitted that nobody from the bus stop had come with her and that she did not have any witnesses. Since there was no concrete evidence proving either side's claims, the officer concluded that everyone was free to go home for the time being. He assured them that the police would continue searching for any possible witnesses before making a final decision. As everyone prepared to leave the station, Heman glared at Juan and warned him that the matter was far from over. She confidently declared that the moment a witness appeared, he would be finished. Juan calmly replied that if no witness ever came forward, then she should come back and apologize to him instead. After thinking for a moment, Heman agreed. She then asked for his phone number, explaining that she would need it either to apologize later if she had been mistaken or to contact him so they could discuss a settlement if necessary. After exchanging contact information, she finally left the police station. Watching her leave, Juan's landlady smiled and commented that Heman was actually a very pretty woman. She jokingly added that it was not such a bad thing that he had ended up getting her phone number. She then laughed while saying that once the misunderstanding was cleared up, perhaps he could even work out with her someday. Before Juan could react, she quickly admitted that she was only teasing him. The two of them then walked back toward their apartment building together. As they entered the building, the landlady reminded Juan that coming all the way to the police station for him had not been a free favor. She jokingly told him to consider it a debt that he now owed her. Hearing that, Juan could only sigh to himself, thinking that it felt as though he had somehow ended up dealing with two troublesome women at the same time. Later that night, Hareen finally returned home. As soon as she entered the house, Eunyoung opened the door and gently scolded her for coming home late, reminding her that she had asked her to return earlier because she was always worried while waiting for her. She then told Haran to take a shower before going to bed. Haran simply acknowledged her mother's words before heading straight to her room. After Haran disappeared into her room, Eunyoung remained standing quietly by herself. She slowly reflected that, for the first time in quite a while, sleeping alone made the house feel strangely empty. With those lonely thoughts lingering in her mind, she realized that the only thing she could do now was continue with her usual solo private night stretch. Later that night, Juan returned to his apartment and got ready to sleep. However, the moment he lay down on his bed, his thoughts drifted back to Eunyoung. Realizing that sleep was not going to come easily, he decided to distract himself. He took out his phone, started watching some wholesome gym vids for various exercises, and began training himself of the techniques he's seen at home. Meanwhile, in the apartment next door, his landlady was awake in her own room. She quietly reflected that the nights always felt especially lonely whenever she happened to wake up in the middle of the night. She thought to herself that she did not even have the motivation to meet a new man anytime soon, despite living by herself. While sitting alone with those thoughts, she suddenly heard unusual noises coming from Juan's apartment. After hearing the sounds from next door, she eventually decided to spend the rest of the night initiating her self-care makeup routine as well. The following day, Juan finally woke up in the afternoon. As soon as he looked at the time, he was shocked that he had slept through almost the entire afternoon. He could hardly believe how long he had been asleep. Quickly getting out of bed, he reminded himself that he still needed to prepare the study materials for Haran's tutoring session the following day. Thinking that the library would be the best place to study without distractions, he got himself ready and left his apartment. After arriving at the library, Juan spent some time preparing for the upcoming tutoring session. Once he had studied for a while, he decided to take a short break and stepped outside the library. While standing outside, he happened to notice Haran nearby. She was not alone, as she was with another young man whom Juan had never seen before. The sight immediately caught his attention. At the same time, Haran was happily spending time with Sungchan. She was clearly delighted that the two of them were finally alone together. Smiling brightly, she told him that she was heading to the library and asked whether he wanted to come along with her. However, as they walked inside, Haran quietly questioned her own decision. She wondered why she had invited him to the library in the first place, since it was supposed to be a quiet place where they could not even have a proper conversation. After entering the library, Sungchan casually told Haran that the books she was looking for were located in another section of the building. Without waiting for her response, he gently grabbed her and led her toward the shelves where those books were supposedly kept. In reality, he simply wanted an excuse to spend more time alone with her. After reaching the section, he began helping her search through the shelves, pretending to look for the books she needed. As they searched together, Sungchan gradually moved closer to Haran, intentionally trying to reduce the distance between them and tease her. At that exact moment, Jo-won entered the same section of the library. The instant he saw the way Sungchan was behaving around Harin, he immediately sensed what Sungchan's intentions were. Watching the situation unfold, Jo-won quietly concluded that it looked as though Harin might be in trouble. Without hesitating any longer, Jo-won walked over to them and greeted both Harin and Sungchan. His sudden appearance completely interrupted the atmosphere between the two. Harin looked surprised to see him there and immediately asked what he was doing at the library. Jo-won calmly explained that he had come to prepare the materials for her tutoring session the following day and had simply happened to run into her while he was there. Sungchan instantly realized that the moment he had been trying to create had been completely ruined by Jo-won's unexpected arrival. Seeing that there was no longer any opportunity to continue what he had been planning, he casually excused himself by saying that he suddenly had something urgent to take care of. Without lingering any longer, he turned around and left the library. Watching Sungchan walk away, Jo-won felt satisfied with what had happened. He quietly thought to himself that he had just protected his student from someone like Sungchan. Believing that he had done Harin a favor, he confidently remarked that she should actually be thanking him. However, instead of appreciating his actions, Harin became extremely angry after hearing those words. Without saying anything else, she turned around and walked away, leaving Jo-won standing there by himself. Harin raised her voice at Jo-won, reminding him that they were in a library and telling him that she was not grateful to him for anything he had done. Before she could continue speaking, Jo-won suddenly noticed that she was walking backward without paying attention to her surroundings. He immediately warned her to look behind because she was just about to crash into one of the bookshelves. Startled by his warning, Harin instinctively turned around, but she had already lost her balance. Without wasting a moment, Jo-won quickly reached out and caught her before she could fall, supporting her in his arms. The unexpected contact instantly made Harin feel embarrassed, and she froze for a brief moment as she realized how close they had become. Jo-won then apologized for what had happened, explaining that the entire situation had only occurred because of her carelessness. Their loud exchange and the sudden commotion attracted the attention of everyone else inside the library. One by one, the people nearby stopped what they were doing and turned their heads to look at the two of them, making the atmosphere even more awkward. Feeling embarrassed by the stares they were receiving, Harin regained her composure and remarked that she was simply going to let the matter slide because they were in a library and she did not want to create an even bigger scene. Jo-won remained standing where he was, silently watching her as she walked away. Deep down, he could not help thinking that she certainly had quite an attitude. He reflected that he had never realized she could make such expressive and intimidating facial expressions before. As he continued thinking about her behavior, he suddenly noticed just how similar she was to Eun-young. The resemblance was not only in her appearance but also in the way she reacted and expressed herself. He concluded that it was only natural because they were mother and daughter. Later that night, while Eun-young was quietly having dinner at home by herself, Harin returned home after spending time outside. As soon as she saw her daughter walk in, Eun-young looked at her with surprise and reminded her that she had said she was going to have dinner before coming home. She then glanced at the nearly empty rice pot and explained that there was not enough rice left for another serving. She added that if Harin wanted to eat, she would have to prepare something else for her instead. However, Harin simply replied that she was not hungry and had no intention of eating anything. Hearing those words, Eun-young became even more surprised because it was unlike Harin to skip dinner. Looking at her with concern, she remarked that something must have happened since Harin had not skipped a meal in such a long time. Harin slowly turned toward her mother before saying that there was actually something she wanted to ask. After hesitating for a moment, she asked how Eun-young had managed to convince her father to marry her. She then added that perhaps asking such a question was pointless because Eun-young was so boring that she was hardly someone who could be used as a reference when it came to relationships. Almost immediately after saying those words, Harin shook her head and dismissed the topic herself, remarking that it had been a silly question in the first place. Without waiting for a response, she turned around and headed straight to her room, leaving Eun-young standing there in confusion. After giving the matter some thought, Eun-young became worried about Harin's unusual behavior. She eventually walked to her daughter's room, entered quietly, and gently asked whether Harin had started seeing someone. Heron looked at her mother for a moment before admitting that perhaps it was all right to tell her the truth. She explained that she was not actually dating anyone yet, but there was a guy she had recently become somewhat interested in. She described him as very handsome and casually admitted that appearance mattered a lot to her. She continued by explaining that the biggest problem was that the man was extremely popular because of his good looks, making him someone who attracted attention wherever he went. Heron then recalled that they had gone to the library together earlier that day. During their time there, she felt that the man had been trying to get closer to her. Although she initially wanted to deny it, she honestly admitted that she had not completely hated his attempts to get close. Feeling slightly embarrassed by her own confession, she quickly added that she was already grown up and capable of taking care of herself, so there was no need for anyone to worry about her. After quietly listening to everything Haran had said, Yoon responded calmly. She acknowledged that it was Haran's body and ultimately her own choice to make. However, she confessed that she could not ignore the uneasy feeling she had about the man Heron was describing.